at reference tables in our very last thing in our last chapter before we started even worrying about our unit exam. And we had a problem getting everything to work. And I was telling you, these sequence or sequence tables will create a unique value throughout your shop or throughout your company. So if you need a next available invoice number that you want for people to be able to get, bless you, and do things with, you can use one of these sequences. So open SQL Server Management Studio for me if you would, and we'll try this experiment since it didn't work quite right for us a week or two ago, because it's pretty cool stuff. And I want you to know how these things work. So last time, way back, before Tim came, we looked at, sorry, my phone's going crazy. It says it's a spam risk. We created this sequence, and we all created it, and then we could all update our own sequence, but we weren't sharing one. And I said, I want to create one that we can share across all of us. So I finally was able to get it all figured out and in place after we left class. And so you can run this statement right here. Select star from master ... sequence table. Try that select statement and let's see if it will let you run it. It's mad at me with putting the master ... on it. Or do I need to just get rid of that? What do you guys have?
Invalid object name, master.sequence table.
So if you take the master ... off and you just have from sequence table, does it like that? Because it's in our master database, so I guess we can all see it with that same name.
No.
Sorry. Doesn't like it? Once you guys see it?
Invalid object name.
So pretty. Master with 2 dots. Since I created it, it's even a little different in new space. That's right. Instead of master.riley re ... Is that the database that I got this in? Like that?
Why is mine
The
all
server
red, but yours
principal,
isn't?
my username is not able to access the data.
Oh, okay. So that's how we've got it. I just got to give you security to access it.
Oh, okay. My sequence table.
We
for
don't
some
have
reason-
permission.
No permission. Okay, so I'm getting there. I get you guys permission for it. And then we'll be able to try to race.
I think what we were thinking, like select statement.
You were able to insert into, weren't you?
Right.
Like this?
Yeah, I have a folder.
Oh yeah, show us what you got.
You make your own table then?
No, he's got it working on this one because he's got 2 values out of it that are missing. So we were able to get it to work right.
Oh, are you going to show my screen?
Yeah.
This is what we had.
You're able to get that current value. So what we did, what Braden and I did, we created a table called sequence table in his database. And then we inserted into that table the next value for this test sequence 1 that I created. So if everybody tries this, create a table, and this is going to be in your database, and you might already have this one because we tried it last week. Once you create the sequence table, see if you can insert into it, and then we have to go out to the master database to find this sequence number that we're all sharing, called test sequence 1. Now, if I were at work, that sequence number that we're all sharing, I would name it something like next invoice number, or, you know, next customer number, or whatever it was for us. But we've got it called test sequence 1. So that's going to be used as the sequence number column of his table when we insert. And then first inserted row is going to be his description. So if he runs this, he's going to get values then that are coming from this test sequence 1 that we're all sharing. So you should be up to what, like 17 or 18 if you select from that now. 16. So if you guys all create your own table and you try to do inserts, you should be able to get that sequence number to go up really fast, and see how quickly you can get that sequence number to go up and how many you can grab before other people take one. Scroll up just a little bit more. Do I? You're using the master database to keep a unique sequence number that everybody's sharing. So it's like an identity column, only it's system-wide. So you can use it for whatever you want to use it for. You got it? See it? So it's just a column, some sort of way for us within our company to keep a unique value going. So it's broken.
Like this, the same as this.
So we have to create this sequence table if we don't have it already. And then we have to try and insert this one that you've got starting on line 11.
Yes. And then you can do your insert repeatedly and see how many sequence numbers you can get.
And do we have to have this part at the top where we select from sys.sequences?
No, we just did that to see what the next number is. So if you wanted to select that next number without using it, without consuming it, you could do that select statement at the top.
Did I be missing stuff from last week when I was skills?
Sometimes it's closed. Studio and reopen it. It's being weird. It's being
Yeah, I'll try that.
So what kind of values are you getting? Are you being able to share it? Can you tell how it's working? What I want you to do is just mess with it enough to get a good feel for how this sequence is a unique value within the server. So I can set up some sort of unique value that crosses systems, that crosses databases, crosses all sorts of tables using the sequence data, and that way I can have a unique value that I can continue to use. Okay, so questions about that one. And then another thing, I'm going to take over from Braden. Thank you, sir.
And it still won't work even after.
Restarting it, so something's wrong.
Mine says there's already an object named sequence table in the database.
No, my sequence.
Probably because you created a thing called sequence table in the database.
Yeah, check your tables, because last time we tried to create it, so you might already have one.
And mine doesn't show. Mine only shows the number. Well, mine's 40.
Uh-huh. Should be.
Because basically what's happening is every time somebody does that, it's got a central one, often some other part of the database, and it upticks that. So you can't get value number 1, for instance, because somebody already used it.
Yeah, so you might not ever see that in the world of work, or it might be a great solution to a problem that nobody knows how to solve at your work, because you can say, well, we can create a sequence number.
Mine went from 23 to 37 to 38 because people
Mine
use.
still says that the invalid object is master dot sequence one.
Like over here on the inserts,
Well, like when I run.
and you have 2 dots.
Yep.
Master dot dot. Yeah. I don't know why it's working for some and not for others.
I only use the 2 rows with 24 and 32.
Those are yours. So that looks good. Do you want to share yours so we can see if we can figure out what's wrong with it? Or do you see it? What about you, Mahala? We can share it.
Yeah,
You want
sure.
everybody to look at it. See if we can figure it out, because I can't see it. So always, when you open SQL Management Studio, always expand databases, always click on your database so that you're in your database.
Oh,
Also, could you be convinced to zoom in a little bit?
that's what I'm trying. I did Control Plus.
Yeah, hold over, so do control scroll wheel on the screen, on the white screen.
Oh, okay. I was trying to Control Plus. And I'm like,
Yeah, no, it's because since the whole window is not just that control plus, it doesn't know where you're trying to zoom in at, and some items can't be pitched.
You see it?
Here's my sequence table.
It's your database creation table, but then you're using the master sequence number in the master database.
I mean, the scroll wheel.
Okay, so now it's when you select again.
That's my last one.
And so if you insert again, you should have the entire sequence number.
I mean, granted, Microsoft did all of it.
So a couple of people have had it since then, so that's going. Okay, look and see what's wrong with hers. I can't see it. Find it.
So what we're using it for points right now.
Sequence.
The year's part of it.
You might have to tell it after that using statement that it needs to go. It sounds kind of dumb, but
no.
Sequence.
Oh, sorry. You mean
Is she not listening?
Run that again.
no, I just didn't know.
Use your,
Second there.
or run the use to go.
Try all of it.
Something
Something worked.
Refresh that.
There it is.
You already have.
Yeah, I have it there.
Try the first insert statement.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're only seeing
That's why you're getting an error. Because you already have it.
Oh, it works now. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to get us all working off the same table and then.
Okay, it works now. Yay. May hate me, but it likes you guys.
They figured it out?
Yeah, I got it.
Yay!
That's my go, it looks like.
So we each had our own table there, but we shared that sequence number across the server so that we could make sure it was a unique value.
Maybe if this is delayed, would you ever want to?
You might have like the next customer number, say you're Casey's, and when people use their debit card, you want to assign a unique sequence number across the whole country. So you're going to have some sort of API that each gas pump connects to, and you're going to return back that next customer number, and that's going to be for all of Casey's, not just for that one location.
So if they don't share the same database.
Right. In our case, we put the table in our database, but that sequence is held in our master database for the server. So we can all access that sequence number on that server, and it would be for one server. Now, you could have servers connected, you know, and add that server name to your qualification, and then you would be able to share across servers too. But that's what you would use it for. So yeah, you might not ever use it. Okay, pretty cool. And then another thing that I looked at after you guys left, way back. I'm from Chicago. Sometimes sometimes I say things right, and other people think that I'm saying them wrong. But, you know, being from Chicago, I know that I'm saying them right? Because that's where all the talk show hosts come from and stuff. So anyways, I overheard this guy in the back last time being a little bit, and he's not here today, sorry, being a little bit less than positive about how to say varchar. And I was like, I wonder if I'm saying it wrong, you know, because this is the way I've always heard it. So I searched, how do you pronounce varchar? And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Sometimes, especially here in Southwest Missouri, we can get in our own little cave and we think we're all pronouncing something right. And once we leave Southwest Missouri, we find out nobody else in the country says it the same way we do, because actually we don't say things right here, unlike Chicago. But anyway, so here it is. I don't know if it's going to work. Sound.
Varchar. Varchar. Varchar.
But that's just the computer speaking. And so I thought, well, you know, I know that, yeah, I do say things the way they are spelled. So maybe that's still not how people say it. So I actually did look a little further. And yeah, everybody says, they usually say varchar, but you can find lots of other pronunciations. So one thing about our field is I would always check before you assume that one way of saying something is right or wrong or whatever. So we just are that way. It's best for us to check. And people can be so weird about it. Someone asked me a couple weeks ago, would you more often hear SQL or SQL? And I thought, you know, because I'm pretty old school, so I say SQL, and it was hard for me to start saying SQL. And then I looked online, and they're like, oh, people say SQL. Okay.
I found a site that actually said that it should be like SQL because it was part of the original like full-length name.
Uh-huh.
And SQL is kind of recent. And then they had a video from like the 90s with Bill Gates. And in the video, he said SQL the most, but then he said SQL.
He also did both, so it's like, You know, I think you just say it however the people you're working with do, and then that's okay. Or you don't, because I still say data. It doesn't matter how long I live in Southwest Missouri where people say data. I just can't do it. It just,
I have never said data except for right now.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, for like 10 years, all the high school teachers only said data. So, oh, thank goodness. If we finally got them switched to data, whatever. It's weird. Okay, let's do new stuff. For us, for this week, we have views that we need to talk about. So let's talk about views. Last week we had quite a few people missing, and so I've had a lot of questions about indexes. Do make sure you do some Googling about that, because they don't say a lot about it in our textbook. And it is kind of, like even Tim mentioned, an interesting subject for you to have, you know, just an entry-level understanding of, not something that you're an expert in by any means. All right, so working with views. What are views? Views are actually named right. They're a view of the data. So all a view is a saved query. And it's a saved query because you guys have seen queries can be hard to write and they can be complicated. So when you get one working, especially if it joins several different tables and it's really complex, it's nice to save it and you can reuse it. So with a view, we can save a query, and then we can allow people access to that view, and to them it looks just like a table. They don't even have any idea that it's just a special snapshot of a table or multiple tables. So views can be really, really helpful. Another thing we use views for, besides simplifying complex queries, is security. Here's a create view. Let's create this view. I'm going to go to SQL Server Manager. And open a new query. And I'm going to make sure that I put this in my database. Now with a view, it is going to use DDL syntax, data definition language, remember? So I am creating something, just like if I were creating a table or an index, I am creating a view. Now after I tell SQL Server that I'm creating a view, I'm going to follow that with the view name. This view name is going to be vendors min. And then we're going to have the as keyword. Whoops, min, M-I-N. We're going to have the as keyword. And after the as keyword, we'll have the actual code contained in the view. So we want this to be a select statement where we're going to select vendor name, vendor state, and vendor phone. From our vendors. Now, when we save this view, we're saving this select statement and we're calling it vendors min. We're not going to run necessarily that select statement, but our database is going to create a plan for how it would run that select statement if it needed to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and execute this code to save that view in my database. When I look in my database, over here in my, I'm going to roll up my tables. Right under my tables are all my views. And so right now I don't really have any of those. So let me go ahead and execute this query to create one. So all I get back is that it completed successfully. So now I should be able to refresh my views display and see that view that I just created. There it is. You got it? So now that we've got that created, it's kind of, we can use it like it's a table. Hey, Alex, come on in. Remember we were running that test outside of class?
Oh, no. What was it supposed to be on the bid?
Because we had our guest speaker on Tuesday, so we had changed our dates, but we'll talk about it after class.
Okay,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
that's all right. Okay, so we've got our view created. So now, we didn't get any data back from this, so we have to actually select using our view. So let's create a new query. And I'm going to use my database. And I can select from that view. So in our example, they want us to select from our vendor's min view, and they want us to use a where clause. So we're going to just select our vendors in California and order by vendor name. Now, SQL Server Management Studio is being real gripey at me right about all these columns because this is a new view, and we know that the IntelliSense doesn't work very good with these new things. But it should be ready to go, so we should be able to run this. Let's try it. Okay, so now when I run this, vendor's min, my view name, just takes the place of my table name in my from clause. Other than that, there's no difference than a regular select statement. I'm just using that view as input. Now, if I wanted to get rid of the where clause and get all of the vendors, I'll get rid of that where clause and just run it. Then we should see all of our different vendors ordered by vendor name. Now, in our where clause, we said we were getting name, state, and phone. So that should be what we're getting. Is it working for everybody? Got your view? Yes.
So I'm wanting to draw a comparison here to like a method or a function. Is what this is essentially letting us do. Is we can set some big complicated select statement if we need to. Save it as a view. And then we can go do this select statement and give me everything it passes back.
And then you don't have to keep recreating that really complicated select statement because you've got the view created that does it for you. So it's adding another layer of overhead.
Does this mean we can finally get rid of the thing where we have to type out the
This minus that minus the other? Yes, you could, because you could have your credit balance or a Mountain Dew or whatever as part of your view and show that calculated field.
And I know this is a bit out of the scope of this class, it's more of the C# stuff. But can you, from your application, say, I want to use this view?
Right, because you're just using that view as your table name. So your C# application has no idea if it's pulling from an actual table or a view. So
but the server can still handle that just fine.
Right, so it's going to take care of it for you just the same way. So it's just like a table. It's just that now, but it's dependent on those underlying tables. So very, very handy for us. So some things about it that are helpful. The benefits they mention. It gives us design independence because if our users are supplied this view, then we could change the vendor's table and not impact them as much as if they were doing queries directly on that vendor's table, because they don't have to see those changes now. They're looking at another layer above that table, So if we made physical changes to that vendor table, we wouldn't necessarily impact them. So it gives us that independence in our design. Now, it makes our data secure. Why? I don't have to give people the salary column in their view. So if I have a network administrator that needs to see the payroll information, because in my company, they decided in the 80s to keep people's passwords with their payroll information, and that's how they still do it, which a lot of companies do, then I'm going to give that network person access to the user's name, their user ID, and their password. And that's the only thing I want them to have access to. I don't want them to have access to that employee's payroll information. So I can set up a view that only has the necessary information in it. Mm-hmm.
If someone tries
Mm-hmm. In your view?
Yeah.
No, it's just going to use whatever's there. So we're going to see in the next couple of weeks stuff that could do that, that could further process our data that we can save. But a view is more presenting the data. So just a view of the data. But we can make it an updatable view too. But mostly we just want to simplify things, make it easy for people to get the columns that they need.
Can we create things in a view? Can we make a view that says create this table?
No, it's all just select statements. So we can update, we could say, just like I can select from vendor's minimum, I could update vendor's minimum and set certain columns to certain values.
But we can't have it just make completely new things.
Right.
Okay.
So we can just use it like a table. That's how we would do it. Here's an example they have in the presentation of some sensitive data. Here we have a table of investors. And in our investors table, we have a net gain column and an investments column. Woo, it's listening to me way much. I love it when it gets to where you don't even have to touch it. How far did I go? Wow, it went fast. I can never do that if I want to. Okay, so in this example then, we're saying we can create a view that has all of the columns of our investors table except for the financial ones. And then we can let our salespeople and all sorts of people see data through that view. We don't have to worry about them seeing that data that they don't have any business seeing. And then they won't even know that there's another table name. We'll just tell them about that view name. So here's our syntax. If you want to put it in your OneNote notes, create view, view name. Now, when we create a view, we can also specify specific columns. We saw with our select statement, it just used whatever columns we put in our select statement, but we could get more specific if we wanted to. And if we wanted to have like a calculated column, we could name all of our columns. After our create with our name, we have the as keyword and then the actual select statement that the view is comprised of. Some of the keywords that we have with encryption, if I say that my view is going to be saved with encryption, that means it's going to be encrypted in the database, and other programmers or developers are not going to be able to read that view. That's important from a security standpoint. If I don't want people to know that that salary column or investment column even exists, I can encrypt my views. Schema binding is also important because we were talking how if I change my vendors table, my view may not be affected. Well, what if my view is affected? As a DBA, I'd like to know about that. Hey, you're affecting a view. You better do something to that view to fix it. That's what schema binding says, is if there's an update to the database, to the table, that's going to affect this view, notify somebody so that they don't mess it all up. Because we could have hundreds of views out there that are impacted by our table change. And in a lot of cases, we don't care. But if we're doing something that's going to affect all those views, we care a lot. And we want to make sure that we get them all fixed. So here's another view. This is a view called Vendors Shortlist. And it is vendors that have invoices. Let's create that one. Whoops. Killed myself on this thing sooner or later. I want to create it because it does some good stuff. So let's open a new query. And I'm going to use my database. Now I want to create this view so we can use it. Vendor short list as. Now our view is going to be based on this select statement. We're going to select again vendor name, vendor contact, L name, vendor contact, F name, and vendor phone. Now, this query is going to be dependent upon a subquery, and our subquery is going to select vendor ID from our invoices table. So that's going to give us all of the vendors that do have invoices, and then that subquery is going to be used to control our outer query to gather information about all of those vendors. Put some comments in there. Let's do it. Subquery selects vendors with invoices. And then our outer query builds vendor data for those vendors. Now, if we run this, we should be able to save our view.
So,
If you save it, you should just be able to select from it. We're going to save a few. I'm going to select from vendor short list, and I just want to run that select statement. And that should give me all of those vendors that have invoices.
but interestingly, it does not show us what those invoices are.
Right, because we didn't include that in our
Maybe that's what
view, right?
That's definitely what we wanted all.
So we just only want our salespeople or our order clerks or whatever to see those vendors that actually have ever ordered from us. Because we could have hundreds that we have set up in the system that we haven't really used. Okay, so that is our vendor short list. Let's create another one. I'm going to do a new query window and create another view. This one, whoops, is going to be called vendor invoices. And our select statement is going to be select vendor name, invoice number, invoice date, and invoice total from vendors. And we want to join our invoices on vendor ID. So now we're getting that data that Seth was concerned about in our last query, that we were getting that vendor information, but we weren't getting information about their invoices. So here's our view that will solve that problem. Let's add a comment or two there. Select information about vendors' invoices.
As long as we're here,
Mm-hmm.
do we want to go ahead and do the one bit of math that we like to do with the invoice total to figure out what the due is?
Yeah, I think that they've got one for us. Let me see.
Or are we doing that in a different one? If we're
We
doing it,
are, and we're getting to it.
We'll get there. Okay.
And everybody's gonna be so happy. And then they'll still go back and do the other one. Okay, so let's save this one, our vendor invoices. We're gonna get a few saved here. And then our next topic is about scripts, and it's kind of easy because you guys have been creating scripts all along as you've been using SQL Server Management Studio. But then after that, we'll talk about building our own functions and data retrieval mechanisms that can be dependent upon our views. So here's one then we've created that just looks at vendors' invoices. So now that we've got it saved, let's run it. Select star from vendor invoices to try to execute that view. And we'll see that we're getting all of that invoice information for our different vendors. So we see each of them and then each of their different invoices. So great, that one uses a nice join. Let's do another one. We'll get us some examples here. Now for this one, I can type, we're going to call it top vendors. And there's been a few times we've asked for or been asked for the top 5% or top 5 of our vendors. So that's a common thing that our management likes to ask us for. So we'll create a view for that. Oops, it didn't go down for me. Okay, so here in our view, we'll put some comments. This is going to be a summary query, right? And it's going to get the sort of a summary query. I guess I should say a top query. We're going to see detail about these top 5%, but it'll be calculating that summary stuff for us to show us those top 5%. And of course, it's going to be invoice total that it's going to calculate that top 5% on, because that's the number that we have in our query. So I'll go ahead and execute this to save that view. And then I should be able to select from my view.
One thing I have noticed is it does not seem to like running the create view statement along with other commands as well.
It does not, does it? It's,
Otherwise the table or the view isn't there. Would you try to select?
yeah, we could do a go.
Okay, good to know.
So if we were to do a nice batch file, let's do it. We would want to have our use statement, and then we would want to have our drop view statement, and then our go to drop it. and then we would create the view and go, and then we could actually use our view. So that would be a good script for creating views, like you guys were setting up for creating your databases or tables. Okay, they have finally, let's create a new query. So you can see why, I hope, a lot of times I don't worry so much about saving the tabs in SQL Management Studio, because I'm used to just coming and generating that create script or whatever from the database itself. And so I don't really usually save that kind of source code where I entered it in the first place. I would come back and save source code where I would, you know, say script view as create to. So I would come back and create all of the source code for all of those different views so that everything could be recreated. So the source code would be saved. Okay, so finally, here's our big one. Create view outstanding invoices. Now in this view, we're going to specify the column names that we want in our view. So our view is going to, again, result like it in a table. And in this table, our interim table created by our view, we want these columns.
So we're not running it as quick as select.
Keep getting there.
Right.
We're just telling
And
them
you'll
what
see
column
why.
they need first.
Is in this one, we are going to select the columns, invoice number, invoice date, and invoice total, but we want that last column to be our calculation. Finally, we're going to calculate invoice total minus payment total minus credit total. And now we had to specify our column names so that we could have this calculated column have a name in our view. Mhm,
Could you also just put it as balance two?
probably. Let's try it. We'll try it. So now that I've got everything specified in the select statement, I can put in my from clause that I want this from invoices, where invoice total minus payment total minus credit total is greater than 0. Finally, so let's run this and save this view. I'll go ahead and put a go statement and my select statement. Try to run it all. Looks good. And so we don't have any order by or anything, but notice we only have 12 invoices that are being produced by this. So that's a lot fewer than the total invoices we have, we know. So we have a lot of things being eliminated by that. So let's try some other things. I think that was a great idea. In this example, we specified our column names. I'm going to put a drop view in. With a go. And now I want to create this view without the column names. And in our select statement, we'll put our as and see if that'll create our view in the same way. So right now, with the way we created it before with our column name specifiers, we saw our different columns. We should see the same thing. So Same. So either way, just perfect. Now notice how, as a developer, specifying the column names is going to be the clearest for you. When you look at that view, if those column names are specified in a list right there, you're going to know exactly what columns are generated by that view. So that's going to be the easiest to work with. But you don't have to. Okay.
It helps a lot with inserts, I know.
To have all those names. Yeah, it really does. When you're the developer, you're like, no, I don't need all those. But then after the fact, it really does help a lot. So perfect, we could do that either way. Now we can also do some summary views. Let's create another one. And you guys can see that this is why I wasn't too worried about us only having the one day to talk about this chapter, because it's really straightforward, and it's all dependent on stuff that you've already done. It's just that now we're packaging it as a view. So for this view, we want it to be a summary, and we want the invoice, or I'm sorry, the vendor name, and we want to count how many invoices they have as invoice quantity. And then we want a sum of all of their invoice totals as invoice sum. Now we want to get this information from our vendors table, but we're going to join our invoices on vendors, vendor ID equal invoices, vendor ID. And then finally, we need our group by clause because we are making a summary query here, and we want our vendor name to be our group by. So for this one, say we're going to get a summary query of vendor information, number of invoices, and total of invoice totals. So you should be able to run that one. I'll put a go and a select. And I go in the right place, sort of. Select star from invoice summary. And there we go. Now we see all of our different vendors with how many invoices and our total that we've paid them. We just use FedEx a lot more than anybody else, don't we? But boy, when we send stuff UPS, it's really big. I don't know what we do there. All right, so we've got now a bunch of views saved. That'll be helpful. This next example that they show in the PowerPoint, we don't have to try, but in this one, they use the schema binding option. And again, that just makes it to where we'll get notified if a change in the table layout would affect the view. Okay, so what about updating using a view? If I look at this view right here, let me get it up on the screen, the one we just created of outstanding invoices, should I be able to update using this view? Could I add like new invoice information? What do you think?
I'm thinking maybe not.
If a vendor existed and we didn't have a lot of requirements for what fields we had to have for an invoice, we might be able to use this as an updatable view. but it would be questionable.
Especially because the contact population is there.
What about this view where we're doing this summary? Would we be able to update using that view?
No,
No, because we don't have a specific vendor number. There's not enough information in this view to be able to update a specific vendor or a specific invoice. Now, if we have certain views, we can use those to update. So a view that's updatable, that allows us to update tables, data behind the view, can't have a distinct or a top clause. It can't be a summary query. It can't have sum, average, any of those aggregate functions. It can't include a calculated value. So there went our outstanding invoice vendor one, because we've got a calculated value there. The select statement can't have a group by or a having clause, and it can't have the union operator. So when we create a view, sometimes if it's a really complicated query, it's going to be a view only view, right? We're not going to be able to update through it.
Can you follow view inside a view? Because in don't the schema binding, we do that calculation like that.
Mhm. Let's try it. Okay, so that's a really good idea. Right here, can we use that other view? Let's try it. So in our select statement here, well, first we're going to create our view. Vendors do. Okay, so in this, they want to select the invoice date, vendor name, and they want the vendor contact information for all of those vendors that have that invoice total minus payment total minus credit total greater than 0. So in the where clause. So how do you want to try doing this? Our first select statement is going to have to be like this, right? Because we want this additional data. Let's try it. So we could select our invoice date as date, vendor name as name, vendor contact F name, plus a space, plus our vendor contact last name. And we want that to be as contact. And then we have to include the calculation because we want additional columns in our select statement. Now in our from clause, they're using the database owner syntax, and then they're joining our vendors to our invoices. Now, what I'm wondering, can we select vendor ID from, what do we name that thing? Outstanding invoices. Is our subquery. Make sure I didn't type it wrong. Outstanding invoices. So it's upset about all these different vendor IDs. So I can start clarifying a little bit. It's saying it's ambiguous because, gosh, this vendor ID is in all these different tables. Which one do you want me to use? Well, I'll say, I guess, the vendor ID. And then I'll bring my subquery down so I can see it a little bit better. And then here I'll say that I want to select outstanding invoices vendor ID. And then it gets really mad at me because it still doesn't see my outstanding invoices view. But I might not be able to use this view within another view. Can I use a view within a view? Will it let us? Try it.
Oh, outstanding invoices that you have
Oh, that's our problem. So what does it have?
as an invoice number.
Okay. So we want to say where invoices, or where invoice number in says that the object cannot reference itself. So do we have to put TBO because of the schema binding? I'm going to take out the with schema binding. And then we get some output there. And it goes away. But I've got it all mad because of that schema binding thing. Now we're finally getting something. I'll let you take a look at that. See if you can get that in yours. So this is an important one because in this example, not only do we have a subquery, our subquery is getting results from another view. So we're being able to use our outstanding invoices view that shows us the invoices that have balances due as the selection criteria for what vendors have things due
So
in effect.
then at the top select statement, you take out the invoice number, date, and everything instead. Sometimes all of our outstanding invoices.
Yeah, well, in this particular example, in our outstanding invoices, we're only gathering the invoice number from that view to use in our query to build this one, because we want all of that data. Since we wanted that contact information that isn't part of our outstanding invoices view, we had to go. Okay, so a view using a view, it can get really deep. So updatable views are an important component. Here's an updatable view that uses our invoice total greater than 0 calculation again, because yeah, we've been tired of typing that all the time. So here we create our view called invoice credit. Notice that it selects the columns that are required to create an invoice. And then that way we can use that view to update our credit total. Oftentimes we'll create a view just for one particular purpose like that, just because we often have to update that credit total. Now this view becomes read-only because it has a calculation. We can drop our views, alter them like we have been. There, that is, what is this check option?
It's kind of like a check or a strike, not a constraint.
Make sure that all the constraints are met, that we don't, or we did not meet a constraint. That's about it. We're going to fail in our updates if we violate any of our constraints, just like the others. Okay. Now, an important component for us are the server catalogs. When we create tables, the data that has to do with what column names we've used, our table names, all of that kind of information is the metadata, right? It's the data about the data. So the metadata says, oh, table invoices contains these columns and what their column names are. So that information has to be saved somewhere, and it's saved within our SQL Server catalog tables. Notice they all have the keyword sys in front of them as the database owner. If I create a table, it would be DBO dot. All of these have the sys prefix because they're part of the system tables. If you look at SQL Server Management Studio, when I look at databases, I can see system databases. Can you guys see those? I didn't give you access to them, so you might not be able to see much there. But by default, any user of SQL Server is going to have some access to these system databases, because you have to be able to get information from them to know how the database is set up. Now, the master database has some tables and system tables. And each of our databases has some system information. If I look at my tables, I see that I have system tables in my database. My tables have to do with the diagrams that I've created. So it's a sys diagrams table that we've had some issues with getting created. So these system tables are available, and they can be used for a lot of different things, like by the database administrator to query the metadata to see what kinds of things have been created and are out there that need to be maintained. Let's try one. Let's try a select statement here. And we sort of jumped ahead because we did that with our sequence. Now, when we are selecting from the system table, we're selecting from the master database. So let's select sys dot tables dot name as table name, and then sys dot schemas dot name as schema name from sys tables. And we're going to join the tables to the schemas. Now the schemas are should equate to our databases. A schema is a name for the metadata that defines a database. So a schema is equivalent to a database. Now when we do our from clause, we're going to specify that we want the system tables, and we want to join that to the system schemas, and the column we're going to use is the schema ID. So the schema is kind of like the whole thing. Now let's see if we can run that, if we have to do any qualification or use statements or anything. And I'm able to, but you might have trouble with it. Now notice that I'm just seeing the stuff for my database, right? My schema. You guys seeing the stuff for yours? Letting you see it. Now, if we wanted to go to the master database, we could do it a couple of different ways. I'm going to try just to use a use clause and see if I get different information. So when I query the master database, I'm getting the fallback tables and those things that I see here when I query. But when I use mine, I'm getting my tables and my information. So this query is really, really helpful. Just to get like a list of tables and things.
When I use master, I only get 4 rows.
So you don't have security access to see some of them then. So by default, it's giving you a few and not all of them. So we could use this for a lot of things, like just to generate a list of all of the tables that we have in our database. You guys, I've been asking you to put a prefix on your table names. So we could add that where clause, you know, where table name is like G underscore or whatever, so that you could just get a list of all of the tables that you had with that specific name. So these systems catalogs are out here, and you can use them for querying and gathering all sorts of information. Whenever we're doing a view, they say there are 2 terms they want you to be really aware of: the base view and the derived view. Notice the base view would be the tables that you're getting your data from, and the derived view would be the resulting view of data from your actual view. Okay, you have an assignment on views, so let's get to that. Check and see what's going on with other stuff. Any questions before we take a look at that?
I was gonna say, in the PowerPoint, I know there's a PowerPoint for each chapter. Are a lot of these examples in the book in the PowerPoint as well? Okay. Good.
Yeah, and I usually use the PowerPoint because the book can get a little wandery. Any others? You guys ready to view? Go view. Create some awesome views.